Hey guys, Scott here. Today I want to talk about the whole Haste and Hindered stacking removal that's happening in the PTB right now and will hit live in 3 weeks. For those who are unaware, the effects of Haste and Hindered can stack, and they've pretty much always been able to stack since the effects came into existence in the game. So you have something like Made for This and Hope stacking together, 3% plus 7% equals 110% movement speed. And so there are combinations of things you can do to run just extremely fast, sometimes as fast or faster than the killer. And those are what they mean by, when they say that there's stacking effects of these things. That is being removed. What's going to be happening now is only the most prominent effect will apply, and you can actually see the exact percentage number that's affecting you, which is nice. So if a clown throws, gas at you, you're going to see minus 15 on the hinder. If you have adrenaline, you'll see, 50% haste. So you'll get an exact value of the movement speed modifier that's affecting you, which is really cool. But it's got the unfortunate downside of neutering a bunch of fun builds that stacked either, hinder or haste. Usually haste is far more haste than hinder. And so a lot of people feel like their builds are kind of being destroyed, and it's making a lot of people upset. So I'm of the opinion, and I think a lot of other people have this as well, this is a necessary long-term change, because as they keep adding more and more haste and hinder and stuff like that, it becomes impossible to balance if you allow these things to stack together. And what it does is it sort of limits the design space of the new perks to where they think, okay, well, hey, let's make this perk give 5% haste. Oh, but what if they have Made for This? Oh, what if they have Hope? What if they're in Dark Theory? Or what if you can't design perks like that, worrying about every other possible perk that can interact with it in a positive way for the person using it to the point it becomes busted. So what they do is end up releasing perks that are just terrible, that don't do anything because they're so conservative and scared of the numbers. So they'll have a new perk that gives 1% haste when you, sing the national anthem or something. So it's just very limited by the possibility of stacking all of these things. Movement speed is a very, very precious commodity in DBD. It is one of the most valuable stats in the entire game. So having things modified is very scary. So in long-term effects, this is good for the game because it will allow them to introduce new strong perks that don't have to worry about things stacking with everything else. So that is, I think, something that they do need to do, and I understand why people are upset about it, but you got to think long-term. Now, would it have been nice if when this change happened, they introduced changes to even more of the perks? Now, they did start with this process on the PTB. Some things did get movement speed buffs, like Breakout went from 7 to 10%, just stuff like that. I would have loved to see more, done this same patch, so the Band-Aid being ripped off is not as painful for a lot of people that used to run these types of builds. But I understand they're kind of slow at updating perks, so I'm willing to bet within 6 months, every haste perk, like Rapid Brutality, for example, they're going to get touched up in some way. I'm willing to bet that's the case. They just weren't able to do it on this PTB, but I do really think this is the start of a good necessary change that has to be made, so those perks will be brought in line eventually. It just might be unfortunate for people that like using all those perks at once in the meantime. Now, I do want to go over why the opinion on this differs so much. And I really think it has to do with a level of experience in the game, varying the opinions here. So basically, newer players and casual players, to be fair, the majority of the player base is probably more upset about the haste removal because they're more likely to not care about that stuff going against it and more likely to have fun with it using it in a silly 4 haste perk build. And that is, let me explain what I mean by that. So people that are not particularly optimizing their gameplay, they're not going to be as negatively affected by haste and hinder. And the reason is a good player knows, for example, on the survivor side, exactly how many times they can run around something right before the killer gets there. That's basically the survivor skill cap, being as efficient as possible with the limited resources of a map. They know exactly when they're going to be able to just make the vault before the killer can hit them, so they don't have to drop the pallet yet and things like that. Now, when you throw haste and hinder into the mix there, it begins to invalidate or lessen the impact of the skill of that experienced player. So suddenly, that's why, good players don't like going against Clown. Even though Clown is not overpowered by any means, good players hate it because if you've got a 15% hinder and Clown's got a 10% haste, suddenly your ability to perfectly gauge exactly the correct distance around a loop doesn't really matter. What's going to happen is you get to a pallet, you drop it immediately because that's your only option. It basically shrinks the gap between a new player and a very good player. And that minimization of skill is the same reason people like hated original Skull Merchant and things like that. Why people don't even like Knight. There's a lot of things that minimize skill in the game, and those don't feel great to go against. However, if you don't have much of a skill at all in the game and you're just an average player, again, I'm not trying to insult people. These are the majority of the people playing the game, by the way. But you're not really as affected by that because if a killer's nearby and you're just an average player, you're just going to, oh shit, drop the pallet. You're not going to go, all right, he's 9 meters away. I'm running at 4 meters a second. So I'm going to get one optimal loop here. I'm going to vacuum the pallet. Like, you're not thinking about this shit. You're just going to run the pallet and drop it. So these haste and hinder effects don't negatively affect you going against them as much, and you get to have more fun with them using them as, as killer or survivor or something, because it's not really, you don't have the mountains of knowledge of movement speed differentials for it to really even apply or for you to give a shit about at all. So the casual player base is going to be more upset about these effects not being able to stack anymore, because when they're going against it, it doesn't affect them very much, and when they're using it, they don't really care about winning. They just want to do dumb shit anyway. So that is why that demographic is more upset about it. And the good players are actually happy with this change because like for pretty much everything I just said, when you have someone that is just simply moving faster than you, it doesn't really ever feel like you're being outplayed. If you're repairing a generator and someone triggers pain resonance, you don't go, oh man, this makes you feel like shit as a player. If you're an experienced player and you get hit by pain resonance, it doesn't have a negative impact on your view of yourself as a skillful player of the game. You just go, oh, he used pain resonance, okay. But when, a head-shaking killer that's clearly worse than you at the game has 3 stacks of play with your food and he runs through batteries included and he's moving at Mach speeds and downs you because he's moving, at ridiculous speeds, you feel more personally insulted about your skill level because the person equipped perks. And that leads to a more negative feeling overall. So that's why the experienced player is going to be more annoyed by this stacking and the less experienced player is not going to care. That's why we have that differentiation of opinions there. And I'm more inclined to think that we should be listening to the experienced players on this one. Even though it's the minority of the players, I would think the good players are the casual players are either going to stop playing or eventually get a bit better to where they know the correct distance, the loop and stuff, and suddenly these things are far more annoying to go against. It's funny, a lot of people like that are annoyed about these changes. They're like, well, fine, I'm just going to run 4 slowdowns now. It's like, it's not 2019 anymore. 4 slowdowns is not really the strongest build you can run anymore, in my opinion. These slowdown perks over time have been nerfed to a pretty significant part to where running 4 slowdowns, it's not like the death sentence that you think it is. For example, I'm far more scared of a nurse running 2 chase perks, 2 aura perks, and then maybe 1 or 2 slowdowns. That's way scarier than a nurse just running 4 slowdowns with no information. So it really is not as crazy as you'd think anymore, just stacking 4 slowdowns. So if you want to do that, I mean, I'm okay with that. I think that's fine. Like you can do that. I consider it, pretty boring, but I would find my skill as a player being invalidated by higher speed to be even more frustrating. So again, this is why it's a contested topic. I don't really think anyone is right here because the casuals player base, their opinions matter just as much as the experienced player. It doesn't necessarily mean that you would listen to the casual player base in terms of determining game balancing decisions and things like that, but you still have to listen to their complaints because they make up the majority of your player base, so it's still very important to understand what they're talking about. But I'm hoping I'm giving a slight explanation as to why the stacking of the stuff does need to change over time. It just is not going to feel great for now, and hopefully we get to a point where a lot of these perks are made good enough by themselves to not have to worry about stacking it with other types of perks. And hopefully we get to a point with that being the case. Seems like we're on our way there. It's just kind of taking a while. So I don't know. Those are just my thoughts on it. I I don't really know how I feel about this. It's definitely a bit of a mixed one for sure, and I don't really feel like super strongly one way or the other. I do think it does need to change, but I understand removing the stacking can be really frustrating too. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Sorry, I have to drink some water or something. My throat is killing me right now. But thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.